The sun was setting on Highway 40 as Mike Donovan eased his 18-wheeler into the Blue Ridge truck stop. After 14 hours on the road, his back ached and his eyelids felt heavy. The big man rubbed his beard and checked his watch, just enough time for a hot meal before his mandatory rest period. At 45 years old, Mike carried the extra weight that came from years of sitting behind a wheel and eating diner food. His company shirt stretched across his round belly, and his heavy steps made the gravel crunch as he walked toward the diner. Other drivers nodded at him, a familiar face on this route. The truck stop was busy tonight. Rigs lined up in neat rows, their metal bodies cooling after long journeys. A group of motorcycles caught Mike's eye, expensive machines with gleaming chrome and custom paint jobs. They were parked haphazardly near the convenience store, taking up more space than necessary. Mike pushed open the glass door of the diner and was hit by the smell of coffee and fried food. Country music played softly from speakers in the ceiling. He found an empty booth and sank into it with a sigh. The vinyl seat squeaked under his weight. "Coffee, hon?" asked a waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile. "Yes, please. And the meatloaf special," Mike replied, his voice deep and gentle. As he waited for his food, Mike noticed a group of men entering the diner. They wore leather vests over dirty t-shirts, with patches that read "Steel Vipers" stitched on the back. Tattoos covered their arms, and chains hung from their belt loops. The 5 men looked around the diner with narrowed eyes, as if searching for something, or someone. The tallest one, with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow, spotted Mike and nudged his friends. They whispered and laughed, pointing in his direction. Mike looked down at his coffee, hoping to avoid trouble. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best defense was to be invisible. But the bikers had other plans. They swaggered over to his booth, surrounding it. The tall one leaned on the table, his knuckles tattooed with the word "Hey-T." "Well, look what we have here, boys," he said, his voice sharp like broken glass. "A real roadhog." His friends laughed. One of them, a man with a red beard and a nose that had been broken many times, put his hand on Mike's shoulder. "You're sitting at our table, fat man." Mike looked around. The diner had fallen quiet. The waitress stood behind the counter, her hand near the phone. "I didn't see a reserved sign," Mike said calmly. "There are plenty of other tables." The tall biker's face darkened. "Maybe you didn't hear me right. This is our spot. Always has been." Mike took a slow breath. His hands, large and calloused, remained flat on the table. "I'm just trying to have a quiet meal. I don't want any trouble." "Too bad," said the biker with the red beard. "Trouble found you anyway." The tall one grabbed Mike's coffee cup and dumped it onto the table. Hot liquid splashed across the surface and dripped onto Mike's lap. The big trucker didn't move, but something changed in his eyes, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous. The biker leaned down, his face inches from Mike's. "What are you going to do about it, Tubby?" Mike slowly stood up. The bikers stepped back, surprised at just how big the trucker really was. At 6'4", he towered over them. His shoulders were massive, his arms thick. "I really didn't want any trouble," Mike said softly, "but it seems you boys are determined to have some." What the bikers didn't know, what nobody at the Blue Ridge truck stop knew, was that Mike Donovan had a past that was about to catch up with these 5 men in a way they never expected. The 5 bikers surrounded Mike, creating a wall of leather and bad intentions. The diner had gone completely silent. Even the country music seemed to have stopped, though it was still playing softly in the background. "Boys, I'm giving you one chance to walk away," Mike said, his voice calm but firm. The tall biker with the shaved head laughed, showing yellow teeth. "You hear that, Snake? The fat man is giving us a chance." He turned to Mike and poked a finger into his chest. "Do you know who we are? We're the Steel Vipers. We own this stretch of road." Snake, the one with the red beard, circled around behind Mike. "I think we need to teach big boy here some manners." The waitress behind the counter picked up the phone. "I'm calling the police," she announced, her voice shaking. "Put that down," shouted one of the bikers, a skinny man with greasy black hair. The waitress froze, the foam halfway to her ear. Mike took a deep breath. His eyes moved from one biker to another, noting their positions. He had hoped to avoid this, but these men had made their choice. "Last warning," Mike said quietly. The tall biker threw the first punch, aiming straight for Mike's face. What happened next shocked everyone in the diner. Mike moved with unexpected speed. He tilted his head slightly, and the punch missed by inches. In the same fluid motion, his right hand shot up and caught the biker's wrist. With a simple twist, he bent the man's arm at an unnatural angle. The tall biker gasped in pain as Mike used his momentum to push him face first onto the table, coffee soaking into his vest. Snake lunged forward with a switchblade that seemed to appear from nowhere. Mike stepped to the side and brought his massive forearm down on Snake's extended arm. The knife clattered to the floor. Mike's other hand gripped Snake's throat, not squeezing, just holding him in place like a parent might restrain an unruly child. "Drop it," Mike said. "All of you, whatever weapons you're carrying, on the floor. Now." The three remaining bikers hesitated. One of them, a heavy-set man with a skull tattoo on his neck, pulled out a chain from his belt loop. "You're dead meat, trucker," he growled, swinging the chain in a wide arc. Mike pushed Snake aside and stepped into the path of the chain. It wrapped around his forearm. With a quick jerk, Mike pulled the biker off balance and sent him crashing into a nearby table. Food and dishes flew everywhere. The skinny biker and the fifth one, a man with a patchy blonde beard, rushed Mike from both sides. The trucker turned sideways, making himself a smaller target. As they reached him, he dropped low and drove his shoulder into the skinny one's stomach, lifting him off his feet. In the same movement, he swung the man around, using him as a battering ram against his friend. Both bikers crashed to the floor, tangled together and gasping for breath. The entire fight had taken less than 30 seconds. Mike stood in the middle of the diner, barely breathing hard. The tall biker was still face down on the table, groaning. Snake was on his knees, holding his throat and coughing. The other three were on the floor, trying to figure out what had just happened. An old truck driver at the counter started to applaud. Others joined in, filling the diner with the sound of clapping hands. Mike wasn't smiling. He looked down at the bikers with something like disappointment in his eyes. "I told you I didn't want trouble," he said. The diner door swung open, and a local sheriff's deputy walked in, hand on his holster. He took in the scene. 5 rough-looking bikers scattered around the floor, a big truck driver standing calmly in the middle, and a diner full of people applauding. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" the deputy asked. Before Mike could speak, the waitress stepped forward. "These men came in looking for trouble, officer. They threatened and attacked this driver. He was just defending himself." The deputy looked at Mike with new interest. "Is that right?" Mike nodded. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to eat my dinner in peace." The tall biker was pulling himself up from the table, his face wet with coffee and rage. "This isn't over," he hissed at Mike. "Nobody does this to the Steel Vipers." But there was something new in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Fear. The sheriff's deputy called for backup, and soon 2 more patrol cars arrived at the Blue Ridge truck stop. The Steel Vipers sat handcuffed in a row outside the diner, their faces a mix of anger and humiliation. The deputy who had first arrived was taking Mike's statement. "So you're saying you don't know these men? Never met them before tonight?" the deputy asked, scribbling in his notebook. Mike shook his head. "No, sir. Never seen them before. I was just trying to have my dinner." The deputy looked up at Mike, studying his face. "You handled yourself pretty well in there. 5 against 1 aren't good odds for anybody." Mike shrugged his broad shoulders. "I got lucky." "That didn't look like luck to me," the deputy said. "That looked like training." "Military?" A small smile crossed Mike's face. "Something like that." The truth was more complicated than Mike wanted to explain. 20 years ago, before he became a trucker, Mike Donovan had been Staff Sergeant Donovan, U.S. Army Special Forces. He had served in 3 combat tours and later became a hand-to-hand combat instructor. His size had always made people underestimate his speed, a mistake many had paid for in training circles. After leaving the service, Mike had tried to live a quiet life. He found peace in the long, solitary hours on the road. The highways became his home, and he was content to leave his old skills unused. Until tonight. The deputy closed his notebook. "Well, you're free to go. These boys have outstanding warrants in 2 counties. They won't be bothering anyone for a while." Mike nodded and turned to go back into the diner. His food had gotten cold during all the excitement, and he was still hungry. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. People looked at him differently now. Some patrons nodded respectfully as he passed. Others whispered behind their hands. The waitress brought him a fresh plate of food. "On the house," she said, smiling warmly. "That's the most exciting thing that's happened here in 20 years. Mike thanked her and began eating. He wasn't comfortable with the attention. He just wanted to finish his meal and get back to his truck for some sleep. A young man approached his table cautiously. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Terry from the Daily Star newspaper. I was here having coffee when everything happened. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? Our readers would love to hear about how one trucker took down 5 notorious bikers." Mike swallowed his bite of meatloaf. "I appreciate the interest, but there's no story here. Just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." Terry persisted. "But how did you learn to fight like that? You moved like a professional." "Just pick things up here and there," Mike said, deliberately vague. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to finish my dinner." The young reporter reluctantly walked away, but Mike knew this wouldn't be the end of it. In the age of cell phones, someone had surely recorded the fight. By morning, it would probably be on the internet. As he ate, Mike noticed a tall, lean man watching him from the counter. The man wore a plain black t-shirt and jeans, but his posture and haircut screamed military. After a few minutes, the man walked over and sat down across from Mike without asking permission. "Staff Sergeant Donovan," the man said quietly. "It's been a long time." Mike's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He studied the man's face, trying to place him. "Do I know you?" "Captain Ellis, Afghanistan, 2008. You were my hand-to-hand instructor at Camp Viper." Recognition dawned on Mike's face. Ellis, the skinny lieutenant who couldn't throw a proper punch to save his life. Ellis smiled. "You fixed that. Saved my life 6 months later when our convoy was ambushed." He leaned forward. "What are you doing driving a truck, Sergeant? Last I heard, you were headed for Delta Selection." Mike's expression darkened. "Things change. I changed." Ellis nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Well, from what I just saw, not everything has changed. You've still got it." Mike looked down at his plate. "Some things you can't unlearn, no matter how hard you try." "Maybe that's a good thing," Ellis said. "Those bikers picked the wrong trucker to mess with." Mike didn't answer. He was thinking about tomorrow and the long road ahead. He had a delivery to make in Denver, and he didn't need complications. But something told him that after tonight, complications were coming whether he wanted them or not. Dawn broke over the truck stop as Mike loaded his thermos with fresh coffee. He had slept poorly in his cab, dreams of old battles mixing with the faces of the Steel Vipers. Captain Ellis's unexpected appearance had stirred up memories Mike had worked hard to bury. As he climbed into his truck, Mike noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the lot. Something about it made the hair on his neck stand up. He started his engine and pulled out onto the highway, checking his mirrors more often than usual. 20 miles down the road, his CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker, this is Roadrunner calling Big Bear. You out there, Big Bear? Over." Mike hesitated. He didn't use a CB handle, and the voice was unfamiliar. Curiosity got the better of him. "This is the driver of the blue Peterbilt. Who's calling?" "Over." "Big Bear, you've become quite the celebrity. Check your phone when you stop next. But watch your back. The Vipers have friends. Dangerous friends." "Over." Mike frowned. "Who is this?" "Over." The radio stayed silent. At his next rest stop, Mike checked his phone and was shocked to find 37 missed calls and dozens of text messages from unknown numbers. When he opened his browser, he understood why. A video titled "Fat Trucker Destroys Biker Gang" had gone viral overnight. Someone in the diner had recorded the entire confrontation. The footage showed Mike's calm demeanor and lightning-fast reactions as he systematically took down all 5 bikers. The video had over 2 million views already. Mike groaned and rubbed his face. This was exactly what he didn't want. As he scrolled through comments, he noticed people were trying to identify him. Some had already figured out he was Mike Donovan. Others were speculating about his background. "Has to be military. Look at how he controls the skinny one's arm. Ex-cop maybe? Too skilled for an average trucker. Professional fighter who got fat after retirement." Mike put his phone away and climbed back into his truck. He had a schedule to keep, viral video or not. Around noon, he pulled into a small roadside diner in western Nebraska. As he ate his sandwich, the TV above the counter showed a news report. The sound was muted, but Mike could see his own face on the screen, a still image from the video. The caption read, "Mysterious trucker takes down notorious biker gang." The waitress caught him staring at the screen. "That's something, isn't it? My cousin sent me that video last night. Said the big guy was like a bear swatting away flies." Mike forced a smile and paid his bill quickly. Back on the road, he tried to focus on driving, but his mind kept returning to the video. If it had spread this far, this fast, it would only be a matter of time before his old life caught up with him. 3 hours later, as the sun began to set, Mike noticed a group of motorcycles in his rearview mirror. 6 riders, moving faster than the flow of traffic, weaving between cars. They weren't wearing Steel Viper's colors, but their intent was clear as they formed a V formation behind his truck. Mike reached under his seat and touched the metal box secured there. He hadn't opened it in years, but he'd never gotten rid of it either. Some habits die hard. The lead motorcycle pulled alongside his cab. The rider wore a black helmet with a dark visor, making it impossible to see his face. He raised his hand and pointed forward, then held up 5 fingers. 5 miles ahead was a truck stop. They wanted him to pull over. Mike weighed his options. He could ignore them and keep driving, but that would only postpone the inevitable. He could call the police, but what would he say? They hadn't done anything threatening yet, or he could face them and end this now. The decision was made for him when he saw the roadblock ahead. 2 pickup trucks were parked across the highway, forcing traffic to funnel into the truck stop exit. This was well organized, too organized for a simple revenge attack by some bikers. Mike reached for his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker. Any units in the vicinity of mile marker 145 on I-80 westbound? We've got an illegal roadblock and possible hostile situation." Over. No response came. Just static. Mike checked his phone. No signal. As he slowed his truck toward the exit, Mike realized he was being herded into a trap. And for the first time since the diner, he felt a familiar sensation rising within him. Not fear, but the calm, focused clarity that came before combat. Mike's massive truck rolled into the truck stop with the motorcycles following close behind. The place looked deserted. No cars in the parking lot, no lights in the diner windows. Only the gas station appeared open, but no attendant was visible inside. As Mike parked his rig, he quickly assessed his surroundings. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the concrete. 2 pickup trucks that had formed the roadblock now pulled in behind him, blocking the exit. Men with hard faces climbed out, some holding baseball bats. Mike reached under his seat and unlocked the metal box. Inside was a 9mm pistol he had carried since his military days, legally registered and rarely touched. He considered it for a moment, then closed the box without taking the gun. Whatever happened next, he didn't want to escalate to deadly force. Instead, he grabbed a heavy flashlight and tucked it into his back pocket. Then he opened his door and climbed down from the cab, his boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud. The 6 motorcyclists had formed a half circle in front of him. Behind them stood 4 men from the pickup trucks. 10 against 1, worse odds than at the diner. The lead biker removed his helmet, revealing a face with a long scar running from forehead to chin. "Mike Donovan," the man said, his voice like gravel. "Or should I call you Staff Sergeant Donovan? Special Forces, retired. Combat instructor. Expert in 5 martial arts." Mike's face remained neutral. "You seem to know a lot about me. Can't say the same about you." The scarred man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Victor. I run the Night Reapers MC. The Steel Vipers are our support club." He gestured to the men around him. "These boys are my enforcers." Mike nodded slowly. "So this is about last night?" "Partly," Victor said. "But it's also about business. The Vipers protect our shipments through this territory. Your little stunt got them arrested and cost us a very valuable delivery." "Not my problem," Mike said. "They started it." Victor's smile faded. "It became your problem when you put hands on my men. Now you owe us." Mike stood his ground, feet planted shoulder-width apart. "I don't owe you anything." "I think you do," Victor said, stepping closer. "And you're going to pay, one way or another. But I'm a businessman. I'm willing to offer you a deal." Mike raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "You've got skills we could use," Victor continued. "Work for me as security for 6 months. Help train my boys. Do that, and we call it even." Mike almost laughed. "And if I say no?" Victor's face hardened. "Then we take payment another way, starting with that nice truck of yours, ending with your hospital bills." The circle of men tightened around Mike. He noticed they were positioning themselves in a way that revealed their lack of training, too close to each other, creating blind spots and potential friendly fire zones. 10 seconds to decide, Victor said. Mike took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I spent 15 years serving my country. Fought in 3 wars. Killed men I never met for reasons I sometimes didn't understand." His voice was calm, matter of fact. "When I left the service, I promised myself I'd never hurt another human being unless I had no choice." Victor smirked. "Touching story. Time's up." "I'm not finished," Mike said. "I also promised myself that if trouble found me again, I wouldn't hold back." Something in Mike's tone made Victor hesitate. The confidence in the biker's eyes flickered. "Last chance to walk away," Mike said quietly. Victor nodded to his men. "Take him." 2 bikers rushed forward, one swinging a chain, the other brandishing brass knuckles. Mike didn't move until they were almost on him. Then, with speed that belied his size, he sidestepped the chain and caught the man's wrist, twisting hard. The biker screamed as bones snapped. Mike used the man's momentum to throw him into his partner, sending both crashing to the ground. The other bikers charged all at once. Mike moved with practiced efficiency, his massive hands finding pressure points, his elbows and knees striking with surgical precision. One by one, the attackers fell, clutching injured limbs or simply lying unconscious. Victor watched in disbelief as his crew was dismantled before his eyes. In less than a minute, 8 men were down. Only Victor and one other remained standing, and the fear on their faces was plain to see. What are you?" Victor whispered, backing away. Mike took a step toward him. "Just a trucker who wanted to eat his dinner in peace." Victor stumbled backward, his face pale with fear. The last standing biker turned and ran toward his motorcycle, abandoning his leader without hesitation. "Wait!" Victor called after him, but the man was already kick-starting his bike. Mike stood calmly among the groaning bodies of the fallen bikers. He hadn't even broken a sweat. His breathing was steady, his eyes clear and focused. This was the man who had existed before the truck driving, the warrior who had been hidden beneath layers of civilian life. "Please," Victor said, raising his hands. "This was all a misunderstanding." "Was it?" Mike asked, taking another step forward. "Seems pretty clear to me. You set a trap. You threatened me. You brought 10 men to hurt 1 trucker." Victor's back hit the wall of the gas station. He had nowhere left to retreat. "I can pay you. I've got money. Lots of it." From the darkness behind Victor, a new voice spoke. "I don't think he's interested in your money, Victor." Captain Ellis stepped into the light, his lean frame silhouetted against the setting sun. He was not alone. 3 more men appeared beside him, all with the same military bearing, all watching Mike with something like respect in their eyes. "Ellis," Mike nodded. "Following me now?" Ellis shrugged. "Let's just say we've been keeping an eye on our old instructor. Good thing, too." He looked at the groaning bikers on the ground. "Though it seems you didn't need our help after all." Victor looked frantically between Mike and the newcomers. "Who are you people?" Ellis ignored him, focusing on Mike. "That video of yours has over 10 million views now. Gone international. Some people in Washington noticed, people who remember your service record." Mike frowned. "I'm not interested in going back." "Not asking you to," Ellis said. "But these bikers aren't just small-time troublemakers. They're part of a larger network moving drugs and weapons across state lines. We've been tracking them for months." A police siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. "That'll be the state police," Ellis said. "Anonymous tip about a drug shipment at this location. They'll find plenty of evidence in those pickup trucks." Mike looked at the fallen bikers, then back at Ellis. "You set this up. Used me as bait." Ellis had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "Not exactly. We knew they'd come after you eventually. We just made sure we were around when they did." He gestured to the truck stop. "This place has been closed for renovation. Perfect spot for an ambush, theirs or ours. The police sirens were very close now. Victor tried to make a run for it, but one of Ellis's men stepped into his path and dropped him with a simple leg sweep. You should go, Ellis told Mike. We'll handle this. As far as the police will know, these men were caught in a routine drug bust. Your name won't come up. Mike hesitated. And if I want to stay out of whatever game you're playing? Ellis pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. That's entirely your choice. But if you ever get tired of the highway, give me a call. Men with your skills are rare, Sergeant. And we're fighting enemies a lot worse than these bikers. Mike took the card reluctantly and tucked it into his shirt pocket. I'm just a trucker now. Ellis smiled. Sure you are. And these guys all tripped and fell at the same time. Police cars pulled into the truck stop, lights flashing. Ellis and his men stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. Mike walked calmly to his truck as officers rushed toward the downed bikers. One young policeman spotted him and called out, Sir, stop right there. Mike turned, his hands visible. Officer, I was just leaving. My delivery's running late. The officer looked at the massive trucker, then at the groaning men on the ground, making the connection. Wait, are you the guy from that video, the one who took down those bikers? Mike's face revealed nothing. Don't know what you're talking about, sir. I'm just passing through. Before the officer could respond, a senior detective called him over to help with the arrests. By the time they looked back, Mike's truck was pulling onto the highway, red taillights disappearing into the darkness. In his cab, Mike felt the weight of Ellis's card in his pocket. The highway stretched before him, familiar and safe. But for the first time in years, he wondered if it was still enough. 3 days later, Mike delivered his load in Denver right on schedule. No one at the warehouse mentioned the viral video, and he was grateful for the anonymity. After unloading, he checked in with his dispatcher and learned he had 3 days before his next haul. Usually, he would spend this time resting in his cab or finding a cheap motel, but today Mike felt restless. He found a small diner away from the main trucking routes and ordered breakfast. As he waited for his food, he pulled out his phone and finally allowed himself to watch the video that had changed everything. The footage was shaky but clear enough. He saw himself through a stranger's eyes, a big man moving with unexpected grace and deadly precision. The comments beneath the video ranged from admiration to wild speculation about his background. This guy has to be ex-military. Bet he was special forces. Look at that takedown, classic combatives technique. Mike put the phone away when his food arrived. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, set down his plate and hesitated. I'm sorry to bother you, she said quietly, but are you him? The trucker from that video? Mike considered denying it, but something in her expression stopped him. Yes, ma'am. Instead of the excitement he expected, her face showed something else, gratitude. My brother was a trucker for 20 years, she said. Those bikers you fought, the Steel Vipers, they robbed him 2 years ago. Beat him so badly he can't drive anymore. Her eyes welled with tears. What you did. A lot of drivers are calling you a hero. Mike shifted uncomfortably. I'm no hero, ma'am. Just defending myself. She smiled and patted his shoulder. Your breakfast is on the house. After she walked away, Mike ate slowly, thinking about what she had said. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Turn on the news. Mike frowned but waved to the waitress. Ma'am, could you turn on the TV? Any news channel? She grabbed a remote and switched on the small television in the corner. A news anchor was mid-sentence. One of the largest drug busts in Nebraska history. Police arrested 12 members of the Night Reapers motorcycle club, including their leader, Victor Crane. Authorities seized over $2 million in drugs and weapons. The screen showed footage of Victor and his men being led away in handcuffs. The waitress whistled low. Good riddance, she said. Those guys have been terrorizing truckers for years. Mike's phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. Well done, Sergeant. Your little distraction helped us take down their entire operation. The card offer still stands. Mike deleted the message. He didn't want any part of whatever Ellis and his team were involved in. He had left that life behind for a reason. After finishing his meal, Mike walked back to his truck. He was surprised to find a small package taped to his door. He looked around the parking lot but saw no one watching. Cautiously, he removed the package and opened it. Inside was a burner phone and a note. For emergencies. E. Mike was about to throw it away when the phone rang in his hand. He hesitated, then answered. "I told you I'm not interested," he said without preamble. Ellis's voice came through clearly. "I know, and I respect that, but things are happening, Mike. That video did more than make you famous. It put a target on your back." Mike leaned against his truck. "What are you talking about?" The Night Reapers weren't just any biker gang. They had connections to some very dangerous people. People who don't like having their operations disrupted. "Not my problem," Mike said. "It will be," Ellis replied. "We've intercepted communications. They're looking for you, and they won't stop until they find you." Mike thought about the open road, the freedom of his chosen life. "So what am I supposed to do? Hide?" "No," Ellis said. "You keep driving, but you keep that phone with you. And when I call with information about suspicious vehicles or potential threats, you listen." Mike was silent for a long moment. "And in return?" "In return," Ellis said, "sometimes you might have to take a specific route. Deliver to specific locations. Keep your eyes open and report what you see." "You're recruiting me," Mike said flatly. "I'm offering you protection," Ellis countered. "The choice is yours." Mike looked at the highway stretching into the distance. His life had been simple before that night at the diner. Now it seemed that simplicity was gone forever. "I'll think about it," he said, and ended the call. 1 month later, Mike's 18-wheeler rumbled through the Nevada desert. The landscape was bare and beautiful, red rocks glowing in the late afternoon sun. He had been on the road for 10 hours straight, his mind focused on nothing but the highway and his delivery schedule. His CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker, this is Roadrunner calling all trucks on I-80 westbound. Be advised, there's..." Mike frowned. He hadn't heard about any inspection checkpoints on this route. He picked up his regular phone and checked a trucker's app that listed official stops. Nothing was scheduled. Cautiously, he reached for the burner phone and turned it on. Almost immediately, it rang. "Don't stop at that checkpoint," Ellis said without greeting. "It's not real." Mike's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How did you know I was about to hit a roadblock?" "We've been monitoring CB channels in your area. This is what I warned you about. They found you." "Who's they?" Mike asked, scanning the horizon for the supposed checkpoint. "Remember Victor Crane? He has a brother. Dominic. Runs the West Coast operation of their organization. He put a bounty on your head after Victor's arrest." In the distance, Mike could see vehicles parked along the roadside. Red and blue lights flashed, but something wasn't right. The pattern was wrong for police lights. "I see them," Mike said. "What do you suggest?" "I can't exactly turn this rig around on the interstate. 2 miles ahead, there's a service road for utility vehicles. It's unmarked but passable for your truck. Take it west for 6 miles until you hit County Road 22. Mike's jaw tightened. "And how exactly do you know about this road?" "Because I'm watching you right now," Ellis replied. "Look up." Mike glanced at the sky and spotted a small drone hovering high above the highway. "Been keeping an eye on you since Denver," Ellis explained. "Good thing, too." Mike saw the service road ahead, a dirt track barely visible from the highway. The fake checkpoint was less than a mile away now. Men in what looked like police uniforms were directing trucks to pull over. "Those aren't officers," Ellis said. "They're Dominic's men. We've alerted real state police, but they're 20 minutes out." Mike made his decision. He slowed slightly, then abruptly turned onto the service road, his massive truck kicking up a cloud of dust. In his mirrors, he saw 2 black SUVs pull away from the fake checkpoint and follow him. "They've spotted you," Ellis said. 4 men, likely armed. Can you outrun them?" Mike laughed grimly. "In a fully loaded semi? Not a chance." The service road was rough, jolting the truck as Mike pushed it as fast as he dared. The SUVs were gaining quickly, better suited for the terrain. "I need options, Ellis," Mike said, his voice calm despite the situation. "There's an abandoned mining facility 3 miles ahead. Get there, and we can help." Mike didn't ask how Ellis knew about the mining facility or what help was waiting. He focused on keeping his truck on the narrow road while the SUVs closed the gap. The first SUV pulled alongside his cab, and a man leaned out the window with a gun. Mike swerved hard, forcing the smaller vehicle off the road. It recovered quickly, falling back but still in pursuit. The mining facility appeared ahead, a collection of weathered buildings and rusted equipment. Mike drove straight toward it, threading his massive truck between abandoned structures. The SUVs followed, dust billowing behind them. Mike brought his truck to a stop in a wide clearing and quickly grabbed the flashlight from under his seat. Then he opened his door and dropped to the ground, moving with surprising speed for his size. The SUVs skidded to a halt. 8 men emerged, all carrying weapons. "Donovan," one of them shouted. "There's nowhere to run. Dominic Crane wants to talk to you." Mike ducked behind an old piece of mining equipment. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Then he heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. A black military-style chopper appeared over the ridge, hovering menacingly. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "This is Federal Agent Ellis. Drop your weapons and put your hands in the air. You are surrounded." The men hesitated, looking around nervously. From the hills around the facility, figures in tactical gear appeared, rifles aimed. One by one, the men dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Ellis's voice came through the burner foam again. "See what happens when you work with us, Mike. Now, how about you reconsider my offer?" Mike watched as Ellis's team rounded up Dominic's men. His simple life as a trucker was gone, but perhaps a new purpose was waiting. He stepped out from his hiding place and looked up at the helicopter. With a slow, deliberate motion, he nodded. The highway would still be there, but now Mike Donovan had a new road to travel.